John Lewis was one of the few remaining key members of the civil rights movement when March, Book 1 was published in 2013. He is one of the original Freedom Riders, served as the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and was instrumental in the organization of sit-ins. He represented the 5th Congressional District of Georgia starting in 1987, and he also decided to write his memoirs as a series of 3 graphic novels titled March. The series was co-written by his aide Andrew Iden and is illustrated by one of my favorite working graphic novel illustrators, Nate Powell of Swallow Me Whole and Any Empire. This is a review and analysis of March, Book 1. Plot Summary. Starting in the present day, John Lewis recounts his childhood and teen years to a few visitors that have come to his congressional office. Lewis highlights his first face-to-face meeting with Dr. Martin Luther King, his choice to reject becoming the first black student at Troy University due to potential threats on his family, and the protest he participated in while he was a student in Nashville. Lewis starts off with personal parts of his early life, and the stories about raising chickens, preaching, and getting his teaching inform the nonviolent philosophies he would adopt slightly later in life. It is in the second narrative arc of Book 1 where the details really grabbed me. Lewis goes into the nitty-gritty of what it was like to mentally and physically prepare for a sit-in. The average public school may teach students about the great physical danger that protesters were placed in during each demonstration, but what is rarely touched upon, and can only really be related through a first-hand account, is the amount of preparation and dedication it really took to commit to nonviolence. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee would hold preparatory lessons and classes where fellow members would physically and mentally degrade each other to practice what it would be like to encounter that during an actual sit-in. The average person can't be expected to be yelled at, insulted, humiliated, and trampled upon without directly fighting back at some point. So nonviolence was a discipline that had to be selected for person by person based on temperament and then practiced through experience and finally tested by the worst 1960s American South had to offer: visuals. Nate Powell had to research and study the faces of actual civil rights activists. Some of these figures only appear for a single panel and are unnamed, but represent someone who did participate in these events. In order to avoid the entire book feeling like a courtroom illustrator had some extra time on their hand, Powell started his caricatures of real people with their basic skull shape, adding details where necessary depending on their size in the frame. As with his other work, facial details are inked loose, and he does not work strictly on model. The book is grayscale, with 3 to 5 values of mid-tone washes for clear details, such as skin tone, and depth. Themes. This memoir is both anthropological and didactic in nature. It aims to teach others about this time in history, but in a more personal way than a rote recitation of events. The first-hand interpersonal testimony from one of the most active participants adds the anthropological element because it comments on how any human being would respond to extreme situations and how to steel oneself for the worst. The biggest takeaway from an initial read would be the amount of sacrifices taken by individuals to fight for their civil rights, and a secondary read may reveal how much of an obstacle the well-meaning incrementalism of political powers, ostensibly on the civil rights movement side, actually was for those doing the negotiating. Closing thoughts. I reread Book 1 after recently getting my hands on a collector's edition of the entire graphic novel set, with the threat of rabid right-wingers railing on about so-called critical race theory and successfully banning the graphic novel Mouse from select school libraries. A comparison of March to Mouse is inevitable to me now. March being a first-hand account of the civil rights movement, and Mouse being a second-hand account of the Holocaust, share that anthropological element. But the texts have practically the opposite approach with their tone. Mouse, even by today's standards, is postmodern, edgy, and painfully introspective in a way that aims to dissuade the reader of any comfort they might find in tales of valiant struggles against an oppressor. The takeaway is that trauma may never leave us, and that what we recognize as heroic is more often a romanticization of good luck. To illustrate a point of comparison, March would never choose to match the tone of the way one chapter closes in Mouse, where Art Spiegelman, our author and also our point of view character, just casually uses some insecticide, the very same insecticide he was just told killed millions of his own people, to hastily kill some mosquitoes. March could uncharitably be taken as apologetics for respectability politics in comparison to Mouse. Respectability politics being the idea that through setting an example that contradicts a bigot's view of the target of their bigotry, that bigot will be left with nothing to complain about. There is limited use of explicit content in Book 1, and the most violent and deadly outcomes are not censored by any means, but they are purposefully obscured by a looser ink illustration style. Lewis is a religious and ambitious man who forthrightly believes in triumph through personal character, the unity of one's peers, and changing the system rather than tearing it down. He did, after all, become part of the same federal government that allowed this to happen for so long in the first place. The book is not squeaky clean, and displays a cynicism for moderate politics that I find to be well placed. It artistically and functionally aims to be understood and read by younger members of society, and preemptively tries to be bulletproof against the kind of criticism, say, a Fox News fueled fanatic would levy at it. Mouse, by comparison, revels in begging for that criticism. That being said, if this book is used in public school curriculum or is available in the library of a state swarmed by parents plagued with dread about all the highfalutin actual history of the United States being taught to their doe-eyed progeny, it will almost certainly fall under the exact same scrutiny, despite its best efforts not to. As a matter of principle, do not let them ban it. I'd like to thank you for listening, and if you're interested, I have my own graphic novel available for preview and for purchase at the website druidcity-comic.com.